So, this past week was mental. I don't think anyone saw Florida beating London 3-0, or Washington demolishing Vancouver 4-0, or indeed Chengdu pummeling New York 4-0 themselves. And those were probably the most unexpected results from a very chaotic week. It was a fantastic watch, and I don't think anyone can dispute that, but it came at a devastating cost. The sanity of anyone forced to create power rankings at the end of the week's action. I myself fall into this category, my weekly power ranking series, and the past couple of days have turned my mind into mush, trying to decide how I'm even going to approach this week, let alone where every team is going to be ranked. In the end, I've decided that it would be truly pointless for me to rank each side to a specific position. So instead, like a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to return to a tier format to provide this video with a bit more structure. As a massive disclaimer, a lot of this will be likely very wrong by this time next week, with so many unknowns about many of the team's strengths, with only 2 weeks of 2-2-2 roll-off, Overwatch League play to go off. Kicking this off right now, I think the 4 worst teams in the league at this moment are the Hangzhou Spark, Dallas Fuel, Boston Uprising and Paris Eternal. Starting with Boston, they didn't play in this past week of craziness, so it's hard to judge where they stand right now after they were destroyed by the Charge before putting up a competitive fight in defeat against Chengdu in week 1. Whilst there were some promising looks from their DPS duo of Kulhex and Blase, their tank and support lines look very weak at the moment, and I'm not confident in the side finding success as the stage progresses. Hangzhou, meanwhile, for a second straight week, looked very poor, this time against Guangzhou. You can clearly tell that they've not adjusted well to this meta, with their previous star man Gushui struggling, having to play Orisa primarily, and without him having his usual impact, it's fallen on the shoulders of their DPS options to deliver, which so far they've failed to do. And with Crystal absorbed in offstage issues, with the Orc, I don't have much faith in this position improving over the coming weeks, suggesting it will be a very rough stage for the Spark. Dallas, to their credit, put up a fight in their only match of the week, which ended in defeat to the Valiant. But also were some better performances from the players, particularly at DPS. The fact they still came up short just goes to show you that right now, and even since stage 3, they haven't been able to piece together a complete performance, with their tank line especially struggling to find a rhythm, and I can't see fortunes changing with this side over the course of their next couple of matches. The last side I have on this tier is the Paris Eternal, who in the space of 1 week I've completely flipped on. Yet again I was drawn into the false hope that has been the Eternal season on so many occasions. Their win against Houston last week looks mainly down to a poor team selection from the Outlaws, as Paris' performances since then have been very underwhelming, with heavy defeats to New York and Atlanta this week. Their DPS duo of Soon and Shadowman have been playing fine, but the rest of the side need to vastly improve their displays if they want to compete more meaningfully moving forward. For my third tier, I'm going to have to name it the Mosh Pit, as I have absolutely no idea about the overall power levels of these teams, with the potential to go on and really do well, whereas there's others who could continue to disappoint and slip further and further down my rankings. A lot of teams make this tier, so please bear with me, in which I have the Houston Outlaws, Philadelphia Fusion, Newark Excelsior, Toronto Defiant, Florida Mayhem, LA Valiant, Seoul Dynasty, and Shanghai Dragons. It's really hard for me to have opinions on these teams individually, as they've just been so inconsistent and random in terms of their performances, so who knows what comes next. And as such, I'll only say a few words on each. Houston defeated one of the most seemingly strong teams in the league last week, but since have lost disappointingly in 2 further matches this week, with the team still confused as to what roster to run and which strategies to use with them. They have potential at their best, but too often just seem lost in direction. New York, meanwhile, I think universally are being seen as terrible so far this stage. Aside from an okay win over a poor side in Paris, they've looked so out of sorts, with horrible losses to Gladiators and now the Hunters the other day. With the talent they have at each position, it is strange that they're performing so poorly. Perhaps the pull pork meta and DPS heroes being played are just one of the weaker areas of their overall game, but let's see if they can rebound over the next few weeks. Philly rebounded themselves this week with 2 important wins against likely bottom half sides. Again though, they don't seem to be playing at their best, and their level of play just seems to flop back and forth, so they have as much of a chance to make the top 6 as finish 12th for all I know at the moment. Toronto started off the week brilliantly by taking down the Dragons, which on paper seems like an excellent result, but then they were taken down by the Fusion, who haven't blown anyone away yet with their play, so I'm still quite wary on how strong the Defiant actually are. Florida, meanwhile, had a brilliant week themselves, taking Washington to all 5 maps and then convincingly brushing aside London 3-0. Ordinarily, I'd love to have them higher, but this is a mayhem we're talking about, and who knows what they're going to look like in the next couple of weeks, with it's entirely possible this was just a one-off, with Florida taking advantage of poor performances from their opponents. Lastly, the Valiant, Dynasty and Dragons I think are mid-table sides, perhaps higher, perhaps lower, but their displays have been so hit and miss at this point, I have no confidence in their positioning either, so I'll let upcoming fixtures sort this lot out. In my second tier of teams, which I think is on the cusp of breaking through and dominating for the rest of its stage, I've got the Guangzhou Charge, London Spitfire, Chengdu Hunters, and Atlanta Reign. Now regarding Guangzhou and London, yes, the Charge lost to Spitfire, who subsequently was stomped by the Mayhem. That said though, so far I think both of these sides have looked much better on average than the teams below them, with the DPS duo of Happy and Nero looking tailor-made for this current meta being used in 2.2.2, whilst Prophet and his tank line have started to rekindle some of their 2018 form in their performances. That said, the Charge are yet to properly be tested outside of their London loss, and I worry that if Chara is focused, we may see that their hot start to stage 4 is more down to the opponents they faced, rather than their overall level of talent I personally believe this team has. The Spitfire, meanwhile, need to get a grip and pull out more performances like they displayed against the Charge, rather than the throw they performed against Florida, with Birdring really needing to get his play together, which has been so inconsistent since the end of Stage 1 last year. Chengdu and Atlanta, however, have a lot more of my confidence and faith in their overall level. Both have looked excellent so far in this stage, for their DPS and tank players playing really well within 2.2.2. The Hunters of course though are renowned for letting their play slip, as demonstrated in their narrow win over a seemingly poor Uprising side, whilst their Reign are in my opinion yet to be truly tested, which is why although they are very high in this tier, I'm not comfortable moving up any higher until I can see more evidence from their play. The top teams at the moment, in my opinion at least, are the Vancouver Titans, LA Gladiators, Washington Justice, and finally the San Francisco Shock. Now obviously, let's address the first two sides I mentioned, who both have losses compared to some of the teams I just talked about a minute ago. I won't deny for 1 second, Vancouver's 4-0 loss to the Washington was dreadful, with their play of May Reaper looking unpracticed and sloppy. That said, all their play up to now has actually looked quite good, in particular from the DPS duo of Hacksaw and Hureg. And I think Washington are an incredible team right now, so losing to them in such a fashion, especially when they played so poorly, isn't as bad as it looks on paper. Bearing in mind the map pool was definitely in the favour of the Justice, so for now, I think they are still a top side. Equally, the Gladiators may have lost to the Outlaws in week 1, but like I said in my last power rankings, I think that defeat was more of a one-off, based upon a poor display from LA, whilst Houston for once turned up and played their best. It would seem that this line of thought is quite accurate, given how close they played the Shock this week, with their DPS playing to their potential, as well as the fact they beat a tough side in the Hunters. So for the moment, I'm going to put aside the fact they have 2 losses, and still consider them a top team, although I think it would be completely reasonable if people think they should perhaps be in the tier below. There should be absolutely no issues, however, with my other top 2 teams, Washington and San Francisco. Both remain undefeated this stage, and have looked really good in their games so far. For the Shock, it's not always been plain sailing, as shown by their narrow 3-2 win of the LA Gladiators, but considering that many are worried about how well they'd adapt to 2.2.2, I think they've shown that they have, with Architect putting in some really good performances after taking his starting spot, although they've only played 2 games so far, so their position here could easily change. Washington, however, have just been fantastic up to now, with their only questionable performance being against Florida, really being due to a poor display from the Justice overall, whilst the Mayhem's victory over London suggests that they are actually quite a decent side. The whole Justice lineup deserves credit, but Corey has taken over the league with his DPS displays in the opening 2 weeks of Stage 4. He bullied the Titans the other day, and his Widow has been extraordinary. To think this guy had been stuck on the Zarya gulags for 3 stages. It's really a shame that the way things are going, Washington could very well finish the stage 7-0, yet miss the playoffs. But as it stands, they're clearly fighting for the top spot this stage, as one of the absolute top teams. And with that, we reach the end of my scuffed Stage 4 Week 2 power rankings, and I'd like to thank you for watching. I'm planning to bring you all my next Overwatch World Cup roster video tomorrow, depending upon announcements, so if you enjoyed and don't want to miss out, then please like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter. There's continuing Overwatch League coverage and content, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.